Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm your host, Caleb Swartz. Our goal here at Dive Deep is transformation. We aim to provide spiritually motivating and challenging conversation that compels you to action. And if you're new, welcome. And if you're a longtime listener, thanks for tuning in again. And Pastor Arlie, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. I have to say, this was one of the more difficult ones to prepare for, because as I sat and listened to the sermon, it was such an emotionally heavy sermon that it was hard to disconnect and think from a theological or intellectual perspective. It truly was.
Sure.
And so there were just moments where I think what I was feeling is what I ended up translating into, well, I wonder about this. And I think the first feeling I took away was just how unfair it all was.
Yeah.
It felt so unfair. It's so interesting that all the meetings happened in the dark.
I know. Well, two of the first trials were all in the dark.
Right.
And the other was at the break of dawn, but still.
Right. Oh, and the arrest happened, of course, in the middle of the night. All
Absolutely.
these things. I'm assuming this had to have been intentional. Intentional so that, was it so that no one could come and contest what was happening? Do you think Jesus still had strong following at that point, people that would have stood up for him? I'm curious.
Not much, because let's look at the cross.
Well, yeah.
Who was there?
And in that very morning, obviously the crowds were all for crucifying him.
Right. I mean, and we're talking a few women and John and, not many others were actually there at the cross. So the realistic picture is, at that point, the fear was in so many disciples. I mean, we're talking not 12. There was 12 at the dinner or at the as the Last Supper that he had. But prior to that, when he talked about disciples and those following him, we're talking a couple hundred.
Right.
We're talking there was a significant number of people that kind of moved in kind of a herd, from one location to the next. Many women, men, all kind of coming along and following. And so, and of course, when he fed 5,000 or 7,000, those were big crowds that were a part of that. However, there was a lot of fear that was a part of all of this. After, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were kind of really trying to do damage to the whole cause. Well, at this point, the arrest was at night, in the dark, about midnight, and the actual bedtime of most people.
Right.
Tell us. It was dusk, dark.
Yeah, so everybody's asleep.
They followed, they didn't really do a whole lot after dark. And so, we're talking midnight. That was like middle of the night for them. And then to have the first trial 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, the second one. So we're talking not many people other than those who would have been contacted to be present.
Yeah.
Hey, wake up. We need to, we're going to do this guy in finally. We've heard enough of his kind of going on and on of what he's going to do. We're going to take him down.
Yeah.
We need you to come.
Yeah.
So, that would have been, really realistically the benefit of having it at that time.
Yeah. Well, and it just amazes me how many laws of their own that they broke. What a way to inspire fear that, as a person who might have wanted to have been there for Jesus at the cross.
Yeah, I read one of the articles I read it said that there were 10 different violations that they had really done and accomplished as a result of illegalities, that were a part of the whole thing. I think I gave about 5. Right. But you could divide them up into even greater, kind of numbers when you kind of see this was all wrong. Nothing they did was right. How could they live with themselves?
Right. And how sad. The irony is tragic that they're the ones that, of course, push the law.
Absolutely.
And yet break it for their own purposes. So, I could see why everybody would be afraid You know, if they're not even going
Yeah.
to hold themselves to their own laws, then what would they do to me if I come out to support Jesus?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
It was just, it was a scary time. And between the Roman government, which was also very oppressive,
Yeah.
and then
And highly apathetic to this situation, to, individual people.
Exactly. And then you have the corruption in the church of the religious leaders. Quite sad, just quite sad when you put it all together.
And of course, we know the end story, so victory's coming, but it almost feels a little bit like injustice that's seen today of, well, the people with the money and the power are the ones that make the decisions, so what chance does a right cause have when it's not the popular opinion?
Well, and also, like, what will stop anyone to be able to retain their power?
Right. Clearly, their own laws won't.
Right.
That's been demonstrated.
Right. And so, they would stop at nothing to be able to make sure they could retain their power, no matter what it was or who it was against or what would take place. And that's what we see, this kind of corruption that's in the church. And so you start to think, well, where was it all? Like, where was the sincere faith of people? And
right.
And it existed.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know that. But there was so much in the upper levels where the power really rested.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's just because the established religion was established for so long. Is that part of the reason? Because, you think back and through the history of ancient Israel, right, Judah, Israel, we see that there were sincere followers, but how quick and how often it turned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so by this time, I wonder if there must have been a few sincere people that truly worship God in the way that he had called them to from the Mosaic Law.
Nicodemus.
Right.
We see those who, Joseph of Arimathea, those who really came forward, risk everything to be able to come and really reveal their devotion to Christ.
So do you think that it is more normalized to, if you are a sincere follower, be the minority than to find these eras where there's true and sincere popular following of God? It almost feels that way.
Yeah, I kind of think about it like at any time period in history, even today, the more people get power, and it doesn't matter whether it's in the religious circle or faith circles or, in political circles or whatever, the more people get power, the more they are willing to do to retain the power. And it's just really sad. And, we see this happening in, even in Christian community.
Oh, that's exactly where my mind was going.
Yeah. And, I think about somebody like Ravi Zacharias and like what a heartbreak that whole situation is.
Yeah. Or Bill Hybels. Same situation.
Yeah. Like some major players in the Christian community who had significant influence and impact and power. And how the enemy is such a master at really distorting all of that picture and destroying that impact and doing damage to the cause of Christ.
Right.
And so there's just always been in man this desire for power. And, that's what a lot of church squabbles are all about.
Right.
Church divisions and kinds of things that happen in our local communities. It's all a matter of that. And so these Pharisees, these Sadducees were so willing to be able to do all of this undercover, without being seen for who they were.
Yeah. And I think that is, wow. When I walked away from the sermon, that was the main point of, wow, look at the contrast of darkness and light here. The people that came against Jesus and the way that they did it, the deception they used, the lies they made, ending in murder of an innocent person, versus Jesus being the light and how he shone through it. And it's so that theme is really just woven all throughout this night.
Absolutely.
And as you were talking, thinking about the actual places, you were sharing a few of the pictures that you got to visit. And the first moment where you showed the steps going up to the high priest, and it was a wow moment for me where I went, oh my goodness, those are the literal stones that his feet would have hit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had the opportunity to visit one of Michelle's cousins for Thanksgiving pre-COVID, and they own a very, very old house in Virginia, original log, early 1700s.
Wow.
And the stone fireplace is still there, and you think about how many generations of people
Exactly.
lived in front of that fireplace and what those stones must bear witness to. And it was just neat. It kind of humbles you, and it's a heavy moment. But then to think about, that's 300 years of history, 2,000, and they bore the feet of Christ on them.
And we had the kind of the Via Dolorosa, the road that Jesus walked on, carrying the cross. We went down, and I don't exactly understand fully archaeology, how one civilization builds on another. But we went down, and so we were under the road where we were kind of going through kind of caves where we were seeing, and then there were actual cobblestones that had been in place where they believed Jesus carried the cross.
Wow.
And so it was like you were speechless. Like, you couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
You just kind of fell on your knees and felt like, wow, Jesus was here.
Yeah. And then I think really the culmination of that feeling was when you described the pit and you showed the picture and you read Psalm 88, and it was like, oh, that battle of light and darkness. I just, the weight that you could feel from that, and no human could have done that. I mean, just
powerful. I mean, but all the human feelings that are a part of Psalm 88. That feeling of rejection, that feeling that all my friends are gone, the feeling that I'm alone. This is darkness, and I'm facing such a deep, dark time in my life. How relatable to so many people as well, that when you say, have you faced dark times in your life and you felt like there was no way out?
Yeah.
That's exactly what Jesus was experiencing.
Right. And just to be in contact with the very stone that he would have touched and felt. And it made me think of, I think it's Luke 19 that talks about how the stones will cry out if the people stop. And it made me wonder, do you think there's some tie-in to how these stones that are still in place are praising Jesus?
I always think about the, Romans 8 when he talks about that all creation is waiting in expectation for the return of Christ. And I think all creation, animals, trees, plants, all creation. And I think, wow, like there's something placed inside of every living thing that is anticipating his return. And I think as we think about all that, he's the master of all things. And could he make the stones cry out? He sure could. And they tell a story, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Of lives and, changes and experiences, all kinds of things. So, yeah.
So let me turn your last question back on you.
Sure.
How's Passion Week going to be different for you this year?
Ever since I've been in Israel, especially this is my second trip, but this was the most recent, I see all of these things differently. When we came back, and we went in the fall before, Sharon said she couldn't sing the Christmas carols without tearing up because she had been in those fields where those shepherds were, had experienced all of those things. I think it's kind of the same thing for Easter and Passion Week. You just feel it deeper because you've experienced it. It's a renewal that's constantly happening. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, thanks for your insight and your time, Pastor Arlie.
Yes.
And thanks for connecting with us on CWC Dive Deep. We want to answer the questions that are on your mind as you listen to the weekend's message. And we encourage you to submit a question by going to cwc.life/dive-deep. If you benefit from this podcast, then join us in our mission and spread the word to tell others about it. Join us next week as we continue our series. And if you've missed past episodes, check those out at cwc.life. Have a great week.